Okay, Amanda. How do you pronounce your last name?
Hazer.
Hazer.
Yeah.
This is Amanda Hazer, and we are going to learn a little bit more about her today. Amanda is a consultant by trade. She spends most of her time supporting ex-athletes transitioning from life after sport. And she also provides executive coaching and workshops. We will dive into more about the nitty-gritty of what you offer here in a little bit. But if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe take it back to early childhood, if that's okay.
Oh, early childhood. Okay. Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and to just, yeah, have a conversation about women and entrepreneurs and sports. These are all the things that I love. So thank you for having me. And yeah, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was one of two daughters. I'm the youngest, and I was always a tomboy growing up, playing all the sports. Started in hockey, and my frame is not one that should be playing hockey with boys. So my mom quickly was like, "Why don't you try soccer?" And I was like, "Oh, I love this too." So, but yeah, anyway, I grew up playing sports, loved playing sports. I Yeah, grew up in Pittsburgh. I had a pretty, I guess, normal childhood. I don't know. Yeah, it was a lot of fun sort of being around family. I have a huge family and friends, and yeah, getting to just sort of be a kid in a small town, which was really lovely. Yeah, should I just go into like college and stuff too, or do you want me to just?
Yeah, that would be awesome. So you said you are from the Pittsburgh area. What town are
Yeah.
you actually from?
Oh gosh. So it's really tiny. It's called West Deer. It is a suburb outside of like northeast of Pittsburgh, and
Okay.
lots of farms, and yeah, just like a small town in Pittsburgh.
I'm very familiar with central Pennsylvania. So my
Oh,
husband's cousin lives in Hollidaysburg, which is
okay.
um it's further east, but
Mm-hmm.
about an hour east of Pittsburgh. So we have three children, and our
Okay.
three children are the same ages as their three children. So we actually
Oh,
vacation with them. I'm very familiar with central Pennsylvania. I love it there actually. It kind of reminds me of Nebraska because it is very like country in a way.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so, but
It
yeah,
gets
yeah.
rural quick outside of the cities, like outside of Philly and Pittsburgh gets rural pretty fast. So
Yeah, know if everybody like if you haven't driven through the state, I don't think people recognize that because like a lot of people just go and they visit the larger cities and they don't really understand that there is
yeah.
definitely a rural area in PA. So,
Hmm.
well, who are the most? If you could tell me, who were the most influential people in your life growing up?
Yeah. I I think that for me, my mom, first of all, was a huge, continues to be a huge inspiration for me.
Mhm.
So she, was a single mom with two young kids and just is incredibly resilient and such a hard worker. Those are things that I always looked up to her for. And she always just made things seem normal. Like she would be at all of the games, she would take us to our practices. She would have dinner on the table. Like she was just super mom. She did all of the
Right.
things for us to make us feel just like a kid and let us have this really beautiful childhood. And so my mom's a huge inspiration to me. She continues to be. My older sister has always been who I looked up to. Like she's 2.5 years older than me, and I was definitely that annoying younger sibling that was like, hanging out with her friends and like trying to be part of their group. And she always let me. Like she was just the sweetest older sister. I mean, we had our fights and things like that, but she continues to be an inspiration again for me now. And then I would say my grandfather is a huge inspiration. So he just was one of those people that anytime we had questions, my kids and asking millions of questions all the time, my mom I think would get tired and she'd be like, "Go ask your grandfather, like go ask your grandfather." And so he was our Google. Like he just knew something about every topic you could imagine, and he had such this passion and curiosity for learning. Even in his older, he's since passed, but in his 80s, he would take classes, about photography or drawing or how to use technology. Like he was constantly learning. And so for me, I mean, yeah, I try to continue to stay curious, and he's always who I'm thinking about when I'm doing that. So yeah.
That's amazing. And I don't feel like very many people have that trait, that learner trait, where they are constantly in that growth mindset and wanting to learn more and just like getting out of your comfort zone. Like even at an older age, I feel like that's a unique thing. And to have that mindset is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
What are some key experiences from your childhood that have shaped you into who you are today?
Um, that's a great question. I think I don't know if it's one moment in time in particular, but I would say so. My sister and I are first generation college graduates, and we, I think, just had such a value was placed on education. And so I think while today maybe that's changed a little bit in terms of, just where folks are learning and the diversity and accessibility that exists, I think back then it was a big deal to get your college degree. And so for me, knowing that my family had worked so hard in order for me to be able to go to school was something that I really cherished. And then I went on to get my master's degree, and I'm just sort of a nerd when it comes to studies. And so I enjoy going to school. My sister's not, she's the complete opposite. But I think that for me, that was very formative, right? Like I knew how hard my family had worked. It was kind of this honor to be like the first in our family to go to college and get a degree. And so I think that that was something I've always valued, is sort of the education and the access to education that I've had. Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. That's a great segue into just your background in terms of education. So, you were a neuroscience major to start out, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
so tell me a bit about your journey from neuroscience to what you're doing now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I think we have something like some steps in common. So
Yes,
you'll
we
have to
do.
remind
Yep.
me. You'll have to remind me. But yeah, I studied neuroscience in undergrad. I was pre med and also went to a liberal arts school. So, it was sort of like biology or chemistry or psychology. And so I chose neuroscience because I really, really am fascinated by humans and human behavior and experiences and how folks make decisions. And so I studied neuroscience. I was checking all these boxes to get into medical school. So I did cancer research, and I was doing sort of internships and things like that with physicians. And then my senior year, I, took the MCATs and did the interviews and got into medical school. And I was, 21, 22 at the time, and started one of the medical schools. And I just had this sort of like overwhelming feeling of anxiety and just that I say it's kind of like tunnel vision. Like I felt like my whole life was sort of like closing in, and the rest of my life was sort of being decided by this one decision to go to med school. And that's pretty dramatic. And I don't think that's the case if, folks are in med school. That's great. It just wasn't for me. And so I ended up deferring my acceptance, and I moved back home with my mom and just sort of took a beat to understand, okay, like that was a great goal. I achieved the goal. I got there. I could have kept going. I just didn't really want to. And that was the first time in my life where I was sort of like thrown by an unexpected feeling of like, oh, this isn't actually what I want. And so, yeah, I decided to. I worked in Pittsburgh for a few years, and then I ultimately decided to go get my MBA, so my master's in business administration, and I focused on innovation and product development. And then I had a decade-long career in healthcare, so I stuck in the healthcare world, just more so the business side versus actual,
Hmm.
being a clinician. And so I worked at consulting. Yeah, I started my career in consulting, worked at Fortune 500 companies, and then pivoted into startups and did about 5 years with startups. And everything is a wild ride, but startups, I started at this company when it was, I think, Series C, so pretty early on in terms of funding. And then ultimately we went public in 2021. And so that sort of trajectory was really just unheard of and also wild. I think I learned a decade's worth of lessons in 4 or 5 years. But yeah, so I was doing that and really sort of enjoying. I think what's fulfilling for me is understanding the mission and the why of the work that I'm doing, getting to work with a group of really intelligent and collaborative people. And yeah, not I get bored easily. So the fact that kind of I get to be in this space called innovation and disrupting sort of status quo is where I love to be. And so I was having a total blast. And I think in 2021, I had just sort of gotten to this point where everyone was going through, COVID and the situation there. And I think with me, it was that layered with the acceleration to IPO, where we were going through this just insane growth, that I really wanted to take a step back. So that was sort of the second time in my life after med school where I was like, oof, I think I need to like take some time for myself. And yeah, so I took some time off. I did some solo traveling, which I highly recommend for anyone who can. I think it's a really beautiful thing to be able to do with you're able to make decisions like what you want to do every day and how you spend your time and what you get to see. And so I did that for a little bit, and then decided that I wanted to get into the world of women's sports. It was something that had always been a passion of mine. I'd always been a huge fan and follower of women's sports. And
Mm-hmm.
I was working with an entrepreneurship coach at the time. I knew I wanted to work for myself. She's sort of like, okay, why women's sports? What do you want to do with this? And I was like, I'm not sure, but I've been volunteering at this women's foundation in Phoenix, and the whole sort of basis of what they do is around women in transition after they're going through either domestic violence or substance use situations, and how they can sort of get a fresh start and move forward. And I said, I'm kind of interested to understand how athletes get their sort of fresh start after they transition out of sports. And so I didn't know one person in sports 2 years ago. So I just started talking to anyone who would like let me, basically, and just asking them questions about their own journey, right? What resources did they have? How did they feel? How did they get to where they are today? And the recurring theme was that there are resources available. So many folks just didn't use them, decided not to use them, didn't know they were available, and ultimately had a really, sort of a tough go at it for a few years until they found what was, their passion after sports. And so the whole goal of my work, and, we can dig more into it, but the whole purpose of the work that I do is really to work with women alongside sports, within sports, after sports, who want to sort of minimize that struggle of finding their identity and finding what motivates and, sort of they're passionate about after sports. So
Very cool. So you talked a lot about transitions, your own transitions, and then the transitions within your role. Um, and there's also a huge mental health component to all of this.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I just want to hear your perspective. So, like, when you transition from, I know that transition from being in med school or starting med school to coming home and just working. Tell me about the mental health transition for you in that aspect of your life, or that part of your life,
Yeah.
and then also how that's translated into your job. Because obviously, your experience in these transitions, I'm sure, have really helped form you and help
Mm-hmm.
you to help you provide the best direction for the women or men that you're working with.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think, I was so young at the time, and I think I don't know that in the moment I realized any of this.
Yeah.
But now looking back, I think the biggest thing that I can pick out in terms of insights of that chapter and that situation was sort of, I had blinders up when I was going through college, right? I was having all these amazing experiences and everything, but I had set a goal for myself when I went there. And part of that may have been societal pressures or pressures I put on myself because, again, being first gen and wanting to do something worthy of this degree. And so I put these blinders up. I had the checklist of things I had to do to get to the goal, and I did them. And I think that so many athletes and folks in general have a tendency to do that, right? You block out the things that are distracting. Oftentimes that includes our emotions and things that our body may be telling us. And then you get the job done because that's what you have to do. So I think the biggest lesson for me looking back on that experience was sort of like allowing other influences in my life to still sort of exist and to pay attention to them, so that I don't get to this place where if I'm only focused on one thing and one thing all the time, 24 hours a day, it will lead me to a place where, sure, I may be happy temporarily or I may get there, but it is fundamentally blocking out this other part of who I am in my life that could be helpful in making that a more sustainable living or a more sustainable life in some way. And so I think that is the biggest lesson that I've taken away from a few pivots that I've had. Like, even when I left my corporate job in 2021, I was extremely burnt out. Like, I was tired. I was working 60 hours a week and from my home and not leaving and having, other things to enjoy in life. And so I think that this notion of just having one thing to be your ups, your downs, your purpose, your inspiration, that's not healthy for me. That is not how I want to operate. And I think that in the conversations that I had leading up to launching my business, right, I talked to probably 4 dozen individuals before I launched my business to just understand their journey and transition. And oftentimes they said something similar, not exactly my story, but just that, when they had this high of winning or doing something incredible within their sport, there was nothing like that. And then with the low, it was the same. And it's really these big swings of emotions that make it difficult to sort of find stasis and find like a middle ground that feels some sense of normalcy. So yeah, I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but yeah.
No, it absolutely does. And just for a little bit of context, I have a similar background where I went to school for medicine as well. I was pre-med and switched to marketing. I didn't end up going to medical school like you did, but um, I think that there were a lot of, for me, the mental health piece was there was so much pressure on doing well and doing well in school on myself, more so myself than anything. I
Right.
started to lose my identity outside of just school, and just what my career was going to be, and sport. So I played softball. So it was just, like I didn't want to be put into a box of doing just the, like, she's smart, she's going to school to be a doctor or a physical therapist, which is what I wanted to do. And she's an athlete and that's who she is. Like that wasn't really who I was. There's so much more to me than just those things. And that has been a reoccurring theme in my life as I've transitioned from, one part of my life to the next. And um, I can speak a little bit to when I made the transition from being, because I was a stay-at-home mom for a little bit of time. So
Yeah.
being a career person and very, very solely focused on my career for a very long time. I waited to get married, waited to have kids, then just being a mom at home and not having that identity was so difficult. So
Mm-hmm.
I resonate with your experience and having the blinders and losing that identity. But what I'm hearing from you is you did a lot of self-reflection along the way to come
Mm.
to those realizations, which is pretty remarkable considering, because I
Mm.
do feel like a lot of people go through med school or go to law school and they have the blinders on and they're like, no, I'm going to do this. And maybe they, like my sister-in-law, for example, she ended up getting a law degree and she doesn't even work in law. Like she
Mm-hmm.
went all the way through the process and I'm sure it served her well, but
Right.
she didn't end up in that career path anyway. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story too, because I do think it's so much more common. Like when I'm talking to these 20-something-year-olds that are my clients who are just finishing school and their D1 programs or whatever and thinking about life, it's sort of like, they have so much time to explore and see, what sort of they do feel passionate about, and doing that exploration. I understand there's an immediate need oftentimes for survival, right? Paying your bills, making sure that
mhm.
you feel like safe and your basic human needs are met. And also it's just like, yeah, if you want to do a master's program or you want to do an internship or you want to try to play professional overseas, right? Like there's so many options. And I think it's just a matter of understanding that things are temporary, right? Like everything in life is temporary. And I oftentimes think about like aging when I do the work that I do and try to talk about like an evolving mindset versus like a transition mindset, because we are all constantly evolving and constantly aging, right? That is a human thing that all of us are doing. And even if it's little things like, oh, I'm really sore after paddleboarding yesterday, and I really wouldn't be this sore if I was 10 years younger or something like that, right? But it's like, I don't know. I think that I try to make comparisons or draw in just basic human experiences that we all have to these specific and really emotional and tough transition periods, because I think the muscle or the exercises, the work that I do with these clients are ultimately things that I hope they use in the future, because I know they will, maybe they have kids one day and yeah, they go from full-time working to stay at home or whatever. They're taking care of aging parents or, whatever it may be. There's so many transitions that happen in life. And to me, it really is just a constant versus this sort of point in time. And so, I think it's really important to think about life as that instead of just one moment in time.
Absolutely. So you alluded to an entrepreneurial coach that you had. Is there anyone else in your life, or is that the person in your life you feel impacted you or swayed you to make this decision and move forward with your business?
Yeah, it was such an interesting, how we got connected was really random, I would say. And then when we first started working together, so I don't know if I told you this before, but I had been volunteering at the Women's Foundation here in Phoenix, and I really knew I wanted to work with women in transition. And at the time, I had been doing some real estate investment, development type stuff. And so I was like, you know what? I really want to. I drew up a 10-page, like, business plan, and I put it in front of my entrepreneurship coach when I first met her. And I was like, I want to create a real estate development co-op that allows women who can like up level or upskill themselves in certain areas of real estate development. So like project planning or real estate or design or architecture or construction, right? Like all of these different things, and ultimately be able to be a part of the investment itself, not just like a 9 to 5. And so I had this whole thing, right? I was like so into it. And she goes, wow, this is like really, yeah, this is great. It seems like you've got it all planned out. Like, why real estate? Why do you want to do real estate? And I could not answer her. Like, I could not, because I think I saw it as a conduit for something that would allow me to work with women in transition, but it wasn't something I was passionate about. Like, I really wasn't. And so she's like, okay, before we go off in this direction, why don't you think about things you care about, what content you take in on the weekends, or who you follow, what you listen to, and then come back to me and like, let's talk about this. And I was like, shoot, okay. That is so like me, to just get really excited about something and be like, okay, I'm going for it, But I have these people in my life now, and these check-ins that I do that's like, wait a second. So anyway, she asked me that question. I did some homework. And I was like, it's always been sports for me. Like, it really has been. It's always been. And she's like, okay, that's great. Like, and then, I talked to 50 people and got to this point. But yeah, it was her who very early on in us working together asked those important reflection questions of why I'm doing something. And it very quickly steered me in the direction of women's sports, which I'm so and will be forever grateful to her for that. Because even if I do that real estate thing at another time, maybe that's another chapter in my life that I do that. I think for right now, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be.
That's amazing. So do you
Yeah.
feel like I just a random question, do you ask those same questions of the people that you work with as
Mm,
clients? I feel like those are very
yeah.
pointed questions for people that are in transition.
I ask a lot of questions. My clients are probably like so annoyed because all I do is ask them questions. But I think that, yeah, I do ask questions like that, right? I do ask sort of check-in questions of, why is this important to you? Why did you get into sports in the first place? Like, who is your motivation, or what is your motivation when you're doing certain things? Because so often, especially in the US now, we get into sports when we're 5, 6 years old, and just sort of, maybe we see an older sibling do it, or our parents are putting us in activities so we can stay busy, right? And then it's just sort of this path we get on, and we just keep going because we're good at it, or it's something that we've made friends, and so it's a social component. And so oftentimes I think all of us, whether you're in sports or not, get onto certain paths and it sort of becomes autopilot. And so oftentimes, especially early on with my clients, I do ask questions around what feels like autopilot. Why do you do these things? Like, yeah, I do ask those questions. So Andrea gets the copyright on some of those questions that I ask, because she asked them first. Yeah.
No, but that's amazing. Like, you took what was an impactful moment for you and you use that with other people. I think that there's something to be said about that, to like pay that forward.
Mm,
So you talked a little bit about like the importance of sports. So
mm.
tell me a little bit more about your relationship with sport. Like,
Mm,
why do you love sports so much? What is it about athletics that like really draws you in?
yeah. Yeah. I think that for me, so when I was super young, I got into soccer. I absolutely felt, and still to this day, like I play on an adult league very slowly. I play soccer today, but it's like this feeling in my body that I am completely out of my head. I do tend to be sort of introspective and somewhat anxious at times. So I feel like it's an opportunity, right? An hour in my day where I am not thinking about anything. I'm allowing my body to sort of just like direct me where it's muscle memory at this point. Obviously, I've worked up to that point, but it's just something that is so freeing and so relaxing to me. And also to be at a team sport, at least, to be in collaboration with other folks and like you're all working towards the same goal. And I think growing up and having my teams that I played on to come from such different backgrounds, but to be able to get on the pitch and just have fun or work towards something to me is just, I really love, and I think that's the beauty in sports in so many ways, is that from all different walks of life, you can get on the field or get on the court and play this game and feel connected with people that so often I think especially today in today's world, we're kind of each creating our own realities with our feeds and our social, like whatever we're taking in becomes our reality. And so it's kind of nice to like get out of that and just be on, experiencing a sport and doing something with your body. To me is there's nothing better. There's nothing better than that. So yeah.
That's amazing. And what would you say, like, obviously there's so many mental health benefits to continuing to play sport and being connected in community and all of those things.
Hmm.
Um, when you are having these conversations with your clients, are you talking about like maintaining that connection to sport or like having like something in their life to not replace it necessarily, but to fill that bucket, right? That is one thing that I will say that I struggled with. And
Hmm.
since opening Victress, it's kind of filled that team bucket, right? Because I have like you're in a room, you're lifting heavy weight with 15 to 20 other women, and it's just special because like it's very similar in sport, right? Like that connection of, like you said, working towards the same goal, and like whether it's an individual goal or a team goal, you're still in there all working hard together,
Hmm.
united. So just kind of tell me about like how that conversation goes when you're having these conversations with ex-athletes or athletes
Yeah.
transitioning.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, and again, from I guess the early conversations in my business, I sort of identified some key themes. There's 6 key themes that I have noticed in conversation with those women, and they're just consistently seen. And one of the biggest ones, and one I speak to about all of my, like with all of my athletes, is community. And I think that, again, those are, I asked questions early on of like, why sports? What did you love about it? What didn't you like about it? Like, do you never want to work out again? Like, let me know, where are we in terms of your journey? And oftentimes community is one of the biggest ones because, yeah, I think we just, especially as women, having a community where you feel, hopefully, right, this is the ideal, that you feel safe,
Mhm.
that you feel comfortable, that you feel able to challenge each other healthily. And I know this isn't always the case, but that is something that can be really difficult to find after college ends, or as an adult. Making friends as an adult is something that can be really difficult, to know that you've got at least some shared values with these people outside of your kids' friends or the people you work with, right? Those are sort of maybe groups that are baked in. But I would say that with my athletes in particular, we'll talk about what they're sort of like longing for in community and how they could find that. So whether that's within a sport that has nothing to do, if they played softball, maybe it's rowing, or maybe it's a lot of folks do get into different gyms, whether that's something like Victress, or doing a marathon, signing up for running clubs. Like there's so
Right.
many things that I think will fit that sort of longing in terms of physical activity and being around women in sport, or just sort of a community. And so that is definitely something consistently and often talked about with my athletes. I think that it's all unique to the person of like what they're really looking for in terms of how they find that. But yeah.
That's amazing. So I want to ask you some more detailed questions about the job, like what you
Okay.
do on a day to day. So give me some insights on who your target audience is. You've alluded a little bit to that, but be a little bit more specific. And what strategies are you using to bring these people in and like get them to start working with you?
Yeah, I would say it's evolving. I'm a year and some change into doing this work full time, so it's certainly evolving as I learn and grow. But I would say I love working with current athletes. I love working with folks who want to think about their future while they're still in the sport. So current athletes is a target audience for me. Recently retired or retired athletes, maybe, 3 or 5 years out from their sport, and young professionals is another group that I focus on. I do primarily work with elite women athletes, which is just collegiate and above. I don't typically work with youth athletes. And then the third group is executives. So folks who are former women athletes who are now in executive roles and want to be a better leader or, find balance in certain ways or work on their communication skills, things like that. So those are sort of the three areas. I would say in terms of finding those groups, to the second part of your question, it does involve like teams and leagues, players associations and coaches and parents to some extent. There's so many groups out there that support these athletes, and I call it sort of the sphere of influence in and around the athletes themselves, because yeah, I mean, for better or worse, capitalism at its finest in this country has made, athletics and made sports a big business. And so, and especially in women's sports now, we just saw with the WNBA All-Star game, 3
Yeah,
million viewers on ESPN. Like, it's insane what's happening. And I'm here for it. I think the investments are overdue. They need to happen. I'm
absolutely.
excited. I think that my fear, and one of the things that I love to talk about and work on, is not making our athletes disposable assets. Like, yes, there's a revolving door of talent coming up from the youth pipeline. Yes, there are international, folks coming from all over the world to play in this country. And also people, they're still people, right? They're humans that have lives and interests and things outside of sports. And so it is still a work in progress, I will say, to where I find these clients. At this point, it has been a lot of word of mouth. And I have this amazing professional community around me that we, yourself included, sort of like give referrals or connect folks to just say, hey, I think, this is the work that Amanda does and you might be interested in it, or, that sort of thing. So I do get a lot of referrals and word of mouth, which is great. I think that as it relates to some of the executive coaching, it has been, there's one partner in particular that I'm working with, and then also just my network of women in business from business school and different programs and things like that I've been in. So yeah.
I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about the executive coaching. So you, on your website, you share a statistic that 94% of C-suite women have played sports at some point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm a leader in an organization myself and
Mm-hmm.
came from sport. The company I worked for in my early adulthood like seeked out athletes. They wanted athletes because they're A-type personality. They're willing to work hard. Like if they're a student athlete, they know how to balance their time. Time management is a skill that they learned very
Mm-hmm.
early on. So just tell me a little bit about like what your experience has been so far working in the executive coaching piece, and the folks that have that athletic background.
Yeah, I think you completely nailed it with the attributes that you brought up of why those folks are sought after and why we are successful in business as former athletes. I think that working with executives is just, I get this big smile on my face because it's so different from the 20 to 30-year-olds I'm working with. And honestly, I love seeing the difference in where folks are in their journeys, because I know that maybe 15 years ago, these C-suite executives were in that same place and they worked so hard to get where they are. And so I just get a big smile on my face because I love working with them, and they challenge me. One of the first executive coaching clients I had, first call, I get on the call, and she's like, so why should I work with you? What is special about you? Why should I work with you? And what are we going to do together? Like, she was just grilling me. And I love, like, I love to be challenged like that, because the younger folks that I work with are just grateful, and they're green, and they don't always ask those questions. And so the executives know what they want. They, for the most part, they know what they want, and they know the caliber of quality that they want to work with in order to get them to some goal that they have in mind. And so oftentimes with executives, it's maybe a temporary situation. So you're going from, you need to do more fundraising, or you're looking to exit a company, or whatever those sort of earlier stage things may be. Or it could be like, working with a COO at a huge publicly traded company that wants to become a CEO. And so how are we getting from where you are today to that point in time, maybe 5 years from now? And so what are the things that you can do to get you to that goal? And oftentimes I will say CEOs and executives, it's lonely at the top. And oftentimes people are telling you what you want to hear, what makes them look good, things that may have some filters on them, and you're not getting the honest truth. And so what I do with all of my executive coaching clients is what I call like a discovery phase. And so I'll do sentiment interviews with maybe 3 to 5 folks in and around the executive. And I'll ask them questions that don't necessarily get asked in a 360 like feedback review. And then we talk about it. I anonymize them and make sure, I pull out insights, and then I talk about it with the executive. These are things that your closest peers are like saying about you. And so how do we create some goals in and around these insights or these areas? Because all of us have blind spots, right? All of us have biases or things that, we think we present a certain way, but we may be coming across or being heard a different way. And so I love doing that discovery phase, because I think it just gives us an opportunity to look at ourselves in a different light. And so, yeah, I feel like I'm rambling now, but I could talk about this all day. I love working with women executives. Yeah, it's so fulfilling.
It's needed. It is, because, and I will say, just from my own experience, like working in a startup and, not having anyone to talk to. I'm very grateful for I'm a part of a pipeline cohort out of Kansas City with other Midwestern founders. And it's unbelievably helpful to be around people that understand it. And then I'm obviously, with you and your experience having worked in startups, do you feel like that experience has lent you the knowledge and kind of the background to be able to speak to the people that are in that position?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. I think this is, to answer your question, yes, I do think my experience has helped. I was in a very fast-paced organization. We grew extremely quickly. I had to wear multiple hats. I stood up teams and let go people, and had to I had 7 managers in 2 years, right? Like, I understand some of the landscape of startups, and I also have no idea what they're going through. Like, I try so hard to not project my experiences onto other folks, because I'm also not an Olympian. I'm not this elite athlete that has this decorated career. And for when I was just getting started, that was like a huge barrier I had to overcome in terms of the value I could bring to the table, because I was sort of, the resources that exist that I have found and am aware of are former athletes now doing sort of transition coaching. And that's just, that's not exactly the path that I'm on. And I had to overcome that in terms of like an imposter syndrome type of thing. But I'm thrilled about it, because I come in with curiosity. I don't know what you're going through. I want you to tell me about it. And also, like, the collegiate landscape now is the Wild West and completely different than when I was in school anyway, So I think it's just helpful to come into any situation that I'm going to attempt to help as a coach, in, whether it's an executive or an elite athlete, with curiosity and empathy, and just asking those questions. Because even if I do have some similar, understanding of what they may be going through, it's certainly different in tens of others of ways that I have never experienced before. And so I try to, yes, leverage some of my experiences, but then also really focus on them and what they're going through right now. Yeah.
That's amazing. Seeing the first person in front of you versus like cookie cuttering it or projecting, that's huge. I mean, that's part of our vision with Victress. Like
Mm,
we're not a cookie cutter experience in terms of like our coaching. When we have someone
yeah.
in front of us, like we're seeing the person in front of us and we're setting a plan and like setting their goals appropriate to who they are and what they want for themselves. And I think that that's
Mm,
really really important in any sort of coaching position, is to be an active listener and to make sure that you are seeing the person in front of you, you're recognizing what their wants and needs are, and you're adjusting as you go. It doesn't mean you can't use the same tools, but just
mm-hmm.
recognizing that every individual and their skill sets are different too, right? Like you're going to have to alter how you're communicating with these people based on just who they are as a human being. So I
Yeah,
love that. It's so important. And I think the empathy piece is huge. If you don't have
yeah.
empathy and you can't like actively listen, the chances of you being able to make an impact on their life are slim. So that's
Mm-hmm.
awesome.
Thank
That's awesome.
you. I can't wait. I need to come work out with you guys.
I know. So
I need to get up
I
there.
also talk about just the idea, and what we can talk about it after the podcast, but
Yeah, yeah.
the idea of having an athlete, because I am an ex-athlete, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that being in the position that I'm in running this facility and like having this community, like a lot of the things that you're speaking to that these women need
Mm,
is what Victress provides from an ownership perspective or even just a management perspective. So it's very unique. We'll talk more about that down the road, but
okay,
I just
good, good, good.
touch on that because it is important to like recognize that like this is a career path that you could have and it fills a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the buckets that is provided in athletics. So
Yeah.
um I guess tell me a little bit more about the athletic coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to know, like, run me through like a step by step of like what those first few meetings look like. I know you said you do kind of a discovery phase with your executive coaching, but you know, like what does it look like from a process perspective when you're starting with an athlete?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would say I do have, I know you just sort of mentioned the cookie cutter, not being cookie cutter, which is totally true. I meet athletes where they are, I meet my clients where they are, and we go from there. I would
Mm-hmm.
say, however, I do have, early on, I had put together a curriculum for my one on one coaching clients that goes from, yeah, again, just sort of understanding each other, discovery, what motivates you, who you are, what your current sort of state is, and then we move into understanding how to ultimately we get to over the 6 months feeling really confident in making your own decisions. So my goal when working with especially younger athletes that are transitioning is a 6 month time frame. So we get to know each other, where I'm constantly giving folks exercises to do and reflections and things like that. I give them homework. And then we get to this point where I don't want to be another coach that you are relied on. So oftentimes athletes are used to following the blueprint of somebody else and executing a game plan. I hope, and my goal is with athletes is to get them feeling confident in their own decision making and having trust and just sort of that self-awareness to be able to face any situation with more confidence and curiosity than they did before. And so the curriculum that I have set up is sort of focused on, early on we do like values and identity work. This second portion is really understanding and experimenting. So I'll give my athletes like a sort of framework for doing experiments in their life. And then, yeah, how did that feel? Why did it feel uncomfortable? Or like, what did you learn from that experience? Or, one of my athletes who's a individual team sport, like individual sport athlete, not a team sport athlete, is a little more introverted, and she's trying to pivot into a new world and get a job. And so I said, okay, you gotta, let's talk to people. Let's go to events. Like, what are some events happening locally in your area that you can just go meet people that are in the business area that she's interested in? And so I gave her some homework to like talk to a few people, like go in person and talk to people and practice talking about yourself in this light that isn't you as an athlete. It is you as this individual who's interested in their business area. And so, I'll give folks experiments or little homework, to do like that. And then ultimately we do get to this framework of decision making that hopefully they feel confident that they can, go back to this framework and say like, okay. And it's basically just a series of questions and also inputs from the conversations we've had of things that they said are important right now. So like, what are your values? Sure. But what are you prioritizing right now? What is it in the next 6 to 12 months that you think is really important? And how do you actually make sure you're staying focused on those things? And so that's sort of a bit of a journey we go on in those 6 months.
I love that because I think that after a life as an athlete, I know for me and a lot of my teammates too, my parents really instilled in me very early that like you are not the sport. Make sure that
Mm,
other things outside of the sport.
yeah.
And I know a lot of the women that I played with that like softball was their life and they've continued to make it their life. And
Hmm.
that's okay. Like if that was the path that they chose, that's totally fine. But I do feel like there is a lot of struggle in the identity piece and I feel like you're pulling that out of them by going through those processes and that's huge, right? Like having someone self-realize like, oh, this is who I am. Like these are the things I'm really interested in outside of just being a basketball player or a softball player or whatever it is. So it's
Absolutely.
I very firmly believe what you do is so needed and so necessary.
Mm,
It excites me that you're in the world doing this work. Um, could you just give
thank you.
some advice to someone looking to turn their passion? So obviously you're passionate about sports, turning their passion into a business or monetizing it.
Hmm. Ooh. Yeah, it's a great question. I was just talking to someone this morning about this exact question, and I think that yeah, I'll just my what I am doing with this work is something that I feel I know really truly in my heart that this is the work that I would like to be doing for the next 15, 20 years. And when I remind myself of that runway, right, this isn't a let's like get rich quick kind of thing, I make decisions differently. So instead of compromising on some of the values that I've like laid out for myself in this work, I, find other ways to make money. So for instance, I'm still, taking on side consulting projects in order to build my business in a way that allows me to stay accessible. That's one of the values I have. I want to stay accessible to athletes. So I do a sliding scale for pay because I want to make sure that folks get the resources they need. And I also am pretty passionate about working with women. I know there are men in need in this area as well. And I have resources for them that I pass them off to other folks working in this space and that sort of thing. So anyway, I would say that yes, this is my passion. I know that this is a long-term goal of mine. It's not like a 2-year goal of mine to just, build this business and sell it. And so I'm making decisions that reflect those values and that intention. I would say that would maybe be step one, right? If you have a passion project or a side project, what is it that you want out of it? Like, is it something you want to make your full time career in the next 6 months? Great. You're going to have to make some decisions or maybe compromises on the values that you have to make that come to life. And also, I think that I don't know, when I first started, I was like, oh, I'm going to be making this much in like 6 months and it's going to be great. And it didn't happen. And I think that that's fine. It's fine that it didn't happen. It's evolving in a way that I'm still proud of. And that is all that matters to me at this point because I can still find other ways to make money and pay my bills and live a life that, allows me to be happy. And so I think it's just a matter of understanding your intention of like, what are the goals? And then going ahead and making decisions that allow you to like flex a little and have balance and not just this sort of like, okay, it's a success if I do this, it's a failure if it doesn't happen. Like that mindset is going to put so much pressure on you in terms of deciding if this passion project should be more. So I guess that's my 2 cents about
Love it. Can you give me
it.
top 3 things that you've learned from doing this work? Like what are the
Oh my
top 3 things that you have developed growth in you since starting this work?
girl, 3 things. Okay. The first is patience. Oh my gosh. Patience is not my strong suit. It's never been. It's a running joke in my family how impatient I am. So I would say patience in terms of allowing things to evolve and develop and not putting so much pressure on myself. So I would say patience is one. Humility is another one, right? Like humility or ego. Like I went from making X amount and climbing this corporate ladder to now, right? You're wearing all the hats as a founder. You're doing all the things. I'm making social media posts, which I'm like not, there's just certain things that I don't love doing
Mhm.
and you have to do them all. So that's a very humbling and like ego check type of thing. So that would be the second. I think the third is just that like I don't know why, and you may check back in like a year and be like, wow, this girl. But I have faith. Like I just have faith that this thing is going to work out. And I don't know why. I just feel like um, I'm making connections. I continue to feel fulfilled with the work that I'm doing. And whether or not it happens, a year from now or 5 years from now, I just believe that this is going to work out. And honestly, I've never felt that way professionally before. Like I've never been so confident in something working out. And so check me in a year from now. Be like, what's going on, Amanda? But yeah, those would be my three.
And I mean, I get it. We're scaling too, so the manifestation piece is huge. Like you have to believe and have faith that you are going to reach those goals. Otherwise, it will
Yeah.
not
Well, who
happen.
else is going to believe that? If you don't believe it, it's like, what are we
Absolutely.
doing? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on our podcast. You're just such a wealth of knowledge and you're doing such
Mm.
great work in the world. And just from someone who's also a fellow entrepreneur and also a former athlete, like this is huge. And I just wanted to shine a little bit of a light on the work you're doing because I think it's special and the community and the world needs to hear about it. So
Thank you. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to tell my story and just have a conversation about this because obviously I think it's important too. And there are plenty of people doing amazing work in this space, and I'm glad I'm not alone in this work. And so I'm just happy to be here. So thank you.
thank you, Amanda.